Youth Education Coordinator for Darby Creek Valley Association. And today our program is featuring an author named Scott Russell Sanders, and he wrote this book, Crawdad Creek. I have a copy right here. It is gorgeous. The pictures are beautiful. The words and the text in it just they just make me feel like a kid again, and want to go out and explore creeks. So I'm hoping that many of you will be inspired to do the same thing after we read this book together. Hopefully you're going to head out to a creek too. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so that Scott can introduce himself, and you'll see us all a little bigger on the screen. There we go. Okay, so Scott, you're on mute. There you go.
All right. So, hello. I am a long way from where you all live. I'm in Indiana, and I'm going to read you a book, the book that Aurora talked about, called Crawdad Creek. And then I'm going to show you a few things that I have found in creeks. For example, just give you an example. I'll show you this later. When I was a boy growing up in Ohio, which is really where this book is set. That is, those are the creeks that I knew as a boy, that I explored as a boy. When I was growing up in Ohio, one of the things I would sometimes find in farm fields were these. See that? Sometimes people call that an arrowhead. Sometimes people call that a stone point. The Indians, the native people, chipped these out of stone and put them on the end of a stick and used them in arrows when they were hunting. And I would find these sometimes washed up on the edges of creeks. So I'll show you a few things. But the first thing I'm going to do is to read you the book. And as I read you the book, you will see the pictures that are in the book. They'll be on the screen, and you'll just hear me reading it. And after I have read it, we'll have time for any questions you have. And I will do my best to answer them. Okay?
Great. I have always wanted to find one of those. I've never found one myself. All right, I'm going to share my screen with you so you guys can all see the pictures nice and big on your screen. There we go. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. Okay, so this is just a map to show you, where the yellow star is. That's where we are. We're here in Pennsylvania. This book was inspired, Scott, right, in Ohio. Is that right? Yes. Yeah, so this state in red is Ohio, and where Scott currently lives is this green star in Indiana. So just to give you an idea of where we're from and where we're going in the book. There we are.
So, the creek behind our house talks all the time. It whispers in the hot months when the water is low, and it murmurs in the cold months under a skin of ice. After snow melts or rain falls, the creek nearly shouts. I'm going to have to read this out of the book. What does it say? I couldn't tell you any more than I could tell you what the frogs are saying when they croak, or the birds when they sing, or the winds when they rustle the trees. I just love to listen. So I'm glad to visit the creek, especially in the summer when the air is like an oven. Been like that sometimes this summer, hasn't it? Really, really hot. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love this illustration with the musical notes in the background illustrating those birds singing.
Yeah, and you will learn, this girl that you see here, she's the one who's talking. She's the one telling the story. And her name is Elizabeth. And she has a younger brother named Michael. And she calls him Mike, and he calls her Lizzie. So when you hear Elizabeth and Lizzie, that's who this is. That's this girl who's talking to us and telling the story. And you notice the story talks about birds singing, and those are the musical notes. And then you see the frog down there in the creek making frog sounds. Okay, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Now, isn't this an interesting perspective? That is the way we look at things. So it's as though we were flying over top of them. Maybe we're a bird and we're glancing down and we see that's Elizabeth on the left and that's Michael wearing a baseball cap on the right. One muggy day, my little brother Michael and I decided to go down to the creek and pan for gold. Dad gave us a shovel for digging up gravel. Mom gave us 2 cake pans for dipping water and swishing the gravel around. We dipped, we swished, hunting for nuggets in our tin pans. And we talked about how we'd spend our money once we struck it rich. So we were thinking we would find gold just like people way out west in California and up north in Alaska, how they found gold, little specks of gold in streams that came down out of the mountains. But we were in Ohio. These 2 children, my sister and I, were in Ohio, and we didn't find any gold in our creek. Okay. Now here's an example of a really interesting perspective. So you see Lizzie's standing on the shore and she's looking down into the creek, and there's Michael squatting down in the creek and he's showing her something. And here's what he says, "Look here, Lizzie," he would cry. Or "Look here, Mike," I would cry. Whenever we thought we'd spied some gold, but it always turned out to be a shiny.
Brett, come here.
Yeah.
It always turned out to be a shiny pebble or a bit of yellow leaf.
Sorry about that. Every time I move.
Every time I would see, when I was a boy exploring creeks, every time I would see something bright and shiny in the water, I'd think, maybe that's gold. Well, it never was, but there were other treasures, and we're going to look at some of those treasures next.
I think I did that same thing when I was a kid, finding little bits of gold, flecked or silver flecked stones is always exciting. Yeah.
What we did find were fossils, the curvy outlines of shells, the feathery shapes of ferns, even the slinky tunnels of worms. Mom told us our fossils were millions of years old. Just think, after all those millions of years, we could still dig up worms in the mud, see ferns curling on the banks, and find mussels hunched in their shells down on the bottom of the creek. Now let me show you a couple of kinds of fossils I would find. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see that?
I can stop sharing my screen. I'm going to stop sharing for a second so that you can be a little bigger.
Okay, so that is a fossil of a leaf. Can you see that pattern of the leaf in there? And I'll show you another fossil. This is a kind of fossil I find here in southern Indiana. And these shapes you see, these are fossils. They lived long, long time ago, millions of years ago. And I don't know whether there are fossils in the creeks where you live, but it's the kind of treasure that you might find in the creek. So we can go back to the slides.
Okay, great. I have never found a fossil either. I'm still looking.
No.
Here we go. I'm gonna bring that back up.
Okay. Now we're on the next page. Once, Michael found an arrowhead in the gravel, and he called me to come see. It was a beauty, made from stone the color of chocolate, as long as my thumb, sharp enough so we handled it carefully. The people who had chipped the arrowhead, Mom told us, had lived here hundreds of years ago, maybe even thousands. I wondered if those long ago people had ever stood here listening to water burble over rocks. And there again, there's one of those arrowheads that I found. See there? And I'll show you another one.
Did you find that as a kid?
I did. I have 4 of them on my desk here right now, and I found them all as a kid, all of them in Ohio. There's another one.
Wow.
And sometimes they're broken. Here's a broken one. See, whoops. See, the end right here is broken off. And I'll show you one more. So that's a somewhat different shape. I found all those when I was a child, and I've kept them all these years.
That's so neat.
And you can see here at the bottom, well, that's
Oh.
okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go back just for a second.
Sure.
You can see here at the bottom of the picture, you see the arrowhead standing up, and that's about how I found one of these. I can remember it was caught in the rocks there. And notice something about the rocks that you see behind them, right in front of Michael, who's kneeling. The rocks are all round and smooth, like these rocks. But that's not how rocks start out. This is how rocks start out. See what's different about that? See those hard edges? How rough it is? So this would break off a mountain. Somewhere up in the mountains, a stone. It would break off because frost, water would get down in a crack, and then when it froze, it would break the rock. And that rock would tumble down the mountain and eventually end up in a stream or be pushed away by a glacier. And as it was pushed and rolled in the stream or under the glacier, eventually it would get smoothed out the way that rock is. See how smooth that is? Whenever you find a smooth, rounded rock like that, you know that it has been moved, it has been in moving water, or it's been pushed along by a glacier, great big mountain of ice that pushes it and grinds it and smooths it off. And I'll show you what the ocean can do to a rock. See that? That is a big, heavy rock. It looks kind of like a gigantic egg. I like to think of it as a dinosaur egg, but it's just a rock. And I found that on the edge of the ocean in Maine. And that's another piece. This started out as a chunk of mountain. And when it started out, it was all broken and sharp edged and so forth. And only the waves washing it back and forth and tumbling it against other rocks and waving it back and forth. That's what made it round.
You know, my kids were just finding creek glass, little pieces of rounded glass in the creek, and it's really the same idea, right?
It is. It is.
Yeah, just on a smaller scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, has anyone here found creek glass? Give a thumbs up if you've seen creek glass or even ocean beach glass. Yeah,
oh, yeah.
I think several of us have.
Oh, yeah. Great. Okay, we can go on to the next picture.
Okay.
Pretty soon, we forgot about panning for gold. There were so many other treasures in the creek. Turn over a rock, for instance, and you might find a salamander. See the salamander down there at the bottom? You might think it's kind of like a little lizard, but it's a different kind of animal, and they're really, really Neat. And I bet you have salamanders in your creeks there. Turn over a rock and you are almost sure to find a crayfish, all jerky and pale, with its eyes peering around on stalks and its claws clicking. Now that's a mean-looking crawdad, our dad said when we showed him one. So that's how we got the name Crawdad Creek. So the word crawdad, which is in the title of this book, is just a nickname for a crayfish. And you can see the crayfish here. It's sort of like a tiny lobster. See the claws? And it's got long antennas in front, and that's how it finds food. And crayfish, I believe you do, I believe I was told that you do have crayfish in your streams there where you live.
We do.
So you can look for those. And they scuttle around on the bottom looking for food.
Oops, sorry about that.
No, we're ready. We're ready.
I hit the button by accident. There we go.
There was life everywhere we looked. Snails grazed over mossy rocks. You can see the snail right there at the bottom, hauling their houses on their backs. That's one of the cool things about snails. You see that shell? They really carry their house around with them. And when they're sleeping or when they're in danger, something might come and try to eat them, they pull back inside their shell. So it's as though you had your house on your back. And as you went around in the world, you always had your house available. Well, that's how snails are. Snails grazed over mossy rocks, hauling their houses on their backs. Dragonflies zipped from shore to shore. In quiet pools, water striders skittered around on their 6 bent legs, making bright dimples on the surface with their feet. Turtles lined up on logs to soak in the sun like green bowls laid out to dry. See where there's a 1, 2, 3 turtles. Every now and again, a snake swam down the middle of the creek with its head plowing a straight line through the water and its body rippling behind like a flag in the breeze. You might find it hard to see the snake, but if you look really close, you see the big turtle, and you see the big turtle has its head lifted up. Look just to the left of that big turtle's head, and you look back in the water and you'll see that snake slithering along. And of course, up above that turtle, that's a dragonfly. They're really beautiful. And they hunt other insects, especially mosquitoes. They like to eat mosquitoes. And I'm happy to have them eat mosquitoes so the mosquitoes don't eat me. So we can change the page then.
I love dragonflies for the same reason. They're beautiful and they are helpful in our environment.
That's true.
Wow, look at this
Now,
picture.
I like this picture because you see this big frog jumping in the water and the artist catches it just as it splashes into the water. No matter how many times Michael and I visited the creek, the frogs always sounded surprised. Crackety, they hollered, then plopped into the water. Fish jumped too, nabbing at bugs, then fell back in with a splash. Silver minnows darted through the shallows. Deeper down, whiskery catfish loafed, their big tails fanning. You can see the catfish down there at the bottom, and catfish have very long, what I call the whiskers. And you can see another fish up top, above the catfish, jumping out of the water to catch bugs that are flying over the water. We described what we saw to Mom and Dad, and they told us the names of everything, or else they helped us look up the names in books. it's really great if you have a mom or a dad or maybe a grandparent or some older friend who can help you find names for and learn about the things that you see in nature. I was lucky because my parents loved nature and they would take me outdoors. And when I was little, of course, I would never go near water, never go near a creek or a river or a pond or a lake. I would never go near water without an adult with me. And then I learned to swim and I got bigger, and then it was okay. It was safe for me to go near water. Usually I would be with my sister or with a friend, and I was rarely alone. But my parents very much encouraged my interest in nature, and I'm grateful for that. So we discovered the name of the kingfisher. That's that blue bird there up on the left with its wings spread out. We discovered the name of the kingfisher, a fat blue and white bird that liked to perch on a dead limb over the creek, then swoop down and gobble minnows. We discovered the names of whirligig beetles. There's the whirligig beetle down below on the left. And damselflies, that's the beautiful fly that you see under the magnifying lens on the right. We discovered the names of whirligig beetles and damselflies and critters so small we had to spy them with a magnifying glass. If your family has a magnifying glass, it's really a lot of fun to look close up at really tiny things. Like you can see the little hairs on the legs of the damselfly that the artist has captured here. And you'd never be able to see those with just your eyes. You need to have something like a magnifying glass. And there are lots of things that live in the water that you can see with magnifying glasses that you can't see with your eyes. We can change the page now.
Sure. Yep. And then the next step would maybe even be a microscope after that, if you want to really get into studying things up close.
That's right. Oh, look at all these tracks. Now, as I describe the tracks, you try to figure out which ones they are. And then after I've read them all, I'll tell you which they are, okay? So Dad, we learn things from our dad, we learn things from our mom, we learn things from our grandparents, grandmother and grandfather. We learn things from teachers, from scientists who would take us on walks. So many people taught us, and when I say us, I mean my sister, and I also have a younger brother who came along a lot later after my sister and I were almost grown up. So Dad taught us to recognize the tracks that animals had left in the mud. We learned the 5-toed print from the paw of a raccoon, the 2 pointy holes from the hoof of a deer, the spiky marks of a crow, even the tiny scratches of a mouse. And those, Dad said, pointing at our own barefoot prints in the mud, are Michael and Elizabeth tracks. Well, you know which ones are Michael and Elizabeth tracks. You can see the human ones. The deer tracks are the ones at the top of the page on the left. And their hooves right there, that's right, their hooves are split. There are actually two parts to them, and they're very pointy like that. And that's the kind of track they leave. The raccoon prints are the ones just below there. Those. And the mice tracks, I don't know if we can see the mice tracks. They're really tiny. The tracks of the crow are on the far right side. They look like sort of like little trees without any leaves on them.
Do you guys see the tracks? You guys see the crow? Can you give a thumbs up if you see him? All right.
So, you know, and also you don't need to go back, but also you can, when you go near a creek or a river, If there's any mud, look around for tracks, but you can also look for tracks in snow. And there's even another place another way you can sometimes see tracks. If where you live, your house or your apartment, if there's some grass that gets mowed and it gets a frost on it in the morning in cold weather, sometimes you can see tracks, rabbit tracks, for example, in the frost. And sometimes you can even see tracks in wet grass. So keep your eyes out for tracks, because that tells you what animals are around.
I've never looked in the frost.
In the warm evenings, just before going into bed, we sat very still beside Crawdad Creek, hoping to see the animals that made the tracks. And sure enough, we saw deer coming down to drink, saw rabbits nibbling and muskrats swimming, even saw raccoons grubbing for mussels in the water. When the weather turned too cool for wading, Michael and I put the shovel back in the garage and the cake pans back in the kitchen. We never found any gold, at least not the kind you wear on a ring around your finger, but I felt rich all the same. If you've ever seen a rabbit, I hope you've seen a rabbit. If you've seen a rabbit in your yard or in the park, sometimes even on the school grounds, you might see a rabbit, and they see you, the first thing they do usually is just get very still. They don't run away right away. They get very still and they watch you. And if they think you're going to get closer, then they might all of a sudden run away really fast. But otherwise they freeze in position, get very still. And so you see the mother deer on the far bank of the creek, and you see a young deer. This is called a fawn. You can see the spots on the side of the smaller deer's belly. And that's a fawn, not a newborn, but a young deer, born probably earlier in the same year. And then you see the raccoon looking into the water for things that it can eat. And so I'll reread that last. We never found any gold, at least not the kind you wear on a ring around your finger, but I felt rich all the same. And we can go to the next page now.
I love that line. I love that. I know it's when I go out and I see animals, it always feels like something a little special, because, a lot of times they try to avoid being seen or being around people because they, it might scare them. But yeah, I don't think I've never seen this many animals all at once together, but it's illustrated so beautifully with all of them there.
Yeah, probably what I was describing are animals that we might see one evening, and 3 evenings later we might see a different one, and so forth. So yes, you're right. We wouldn't see all those animals at once. But in a book, you have a picture, and it just gives you a sense of the kinds of animals that you might see around a creek. Animals need water just the way we do. We drink water and we cook with water, and they need water to drink. And one of the ways that they get water for drinking is to go down to streams, which is a reason why we need to keep our streams clean. We need to keep the water clean. Sometimes people in cities, it may be true where you live, actually take their water from a river. And human beings need clean water, but so do animals. And so we need to keep our streams clean so that the animals can stay healthy.
Absolutely.
So now there's the kind of riches that we could find. Cold weather or hot, I still go down to the creek every chance I get. There's always something to see. In daylight, the water glows with all the colors of the sky. One morning, a sycamore leaf came floating by, the sides curled up to form a little boat. And there inside, as calm as you please, sat a butterfly. While I watched, the butterfly opened its orange and black wings and flew. Now, in my story, I didn't say what kind of butterfly that is, but the illustrator, the artist, the man who drew these pictures, knew what kind I was thinking of when I said orange and black wings. I was talking about a monarch butterfly. Maybe you've seen these. Give me a thumbs up if you've seen a monarch butterfly. Have you? Oh, good, 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 good. They're beautiful. And you may know, in fact, if you're really lucky, you may have had a chance to see one hatch. My wife and I here in Indiana grow milkweed in our garden because this kind of butterfly lays its eggs only on milkweed. And on our milkweed, this month, actually, August, we found a couple of caterpillars from this kind of butterfly, monarch caterpillars. And we brought them inside and put them in a case with a screen around it where they would be safe and nothing would eat them and wasps wouldn't sting them. And we brought in milkweed leaves for them to eat because they needed to keep eating milkweed. And the caterpillars got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then one day we came out in the morning and all those caterpillars, the two caterpillars had formed a chrysalis. It's a case inside which the caterpillar turns into a butterfly. It is amazing to watch. And when the butterfly came out, looking just like this beautiful one you see in the picture, perfect, every bit of it, just gorgeous. When the butterfly came out, we kept it indoors for a day so its wings could get strong. And then I put my finger up next to it, where in the little enclosure where we were keeping it. I put my finger up next to it, and it crawled right onto my finger. And we went outside the screen porch, because all this was happening inside our screen porch. I went outside the screen porch and held up my finger, and off it flew. Beautiful. And the special thing about this kind of butterfly is that once a year, at the end of the summer, the newborn butterflies, like the ones that came from our house, fly all the way to Mexico. That's 2,000 miles. That's farther than from where I'm sitting to where you're sitting. So that little tiny insect can fly all that way, and it stays in Mexico through the winter. And then in the spring, when the air warms up, the butterflies, and there are millions of them, fly back up to the southern part of the United States and lay their eggs. And those eggs then become caterpillars form chrysalises, and the chrysalises hatch out more butterflies.
Yeah. We had someone in the chat share that they've had chrysalises and monarchs, caterpillars. And I also see someone sharing in the picture, Cal is showing us a monarch caterpillar right there. So we have some some kids with some experience with monarchs.
That is fabulous. That is fabulous. And you know, there are kids all across America who help the monarchs by making sure there's milkweed available. And there are some places where they keep track of them as they migrate through on their way to Mexico this time of year. And there are places on the web, there are places online, and if you haven't looked at them, maybe your parents can help you find them, where you can see the movement of monarchs down to Mexico. So now we're coming to the last page of the book. That's the next one. But remember, the book started in snow, and it went through the year, through the warm months, through spring and the warm months, and now we're back to winter at the end of the book. And I expect you have a fair amount of snow where you live in Pennsylvania. Maybe not every winter, and probably not as much snow as your parents if they lived in the same place that you now live in. If they grew up there, maybe not as much snow as they remember, because our winters are not as cold anymore. So on clear nights, before the moon comes up, stars waver on the surface like fireflies. Wind ruffles the water like a hand brushing over a silky cloth. In the morning before I go to school, and at night before I go to bed, I can hear the mutter and mumble of water pouring over rocks. Even when there are no other critters in sight, I'm never lonesome at Crawdad Creek because the water keeps talking. So that's the book. Do we have time for a few questions, Aurora?
Absolutely, yeah. And I love that message there at the end. I've never felt lonesome at Crawdad Creek because the water keeps talking. And I just feel like that's so relevant right now because so many of us are spending so much more time in nature and perhaps at creeks and maybe feeling a little lonesome. So that is just, it's a beautiful and kind of appropriate for the time we're in right now, that there's so much going on at the creek to connect to.
You know, another thing I'll suggest about for listening is, I don't know how late you're able to stay up, the children, but if you're able to stay up till almost dark one night, go out, and if you have a porch or just on the front steps, go outside, maybe take mom or dad with you and listen, because what you'll hear right now are thousands and thousands of crickets.
Did you got any?
Was there a
And
question?
where we live,
We'll hold the questions for just a minute, okay? We'll come
okay,
back.
and where I live, we also have an insect called cicadas, and I don't know whether you have them in your part of Pennsylvania. Do you, Aurora?
We
Cicadas,
do.
locusts?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we definitely have
'cause they-
cicadas.
Yeah, and they make lots of wonderful sounds this time of the summer, late summer. Crickets and cicadas and their katydids and other insects. So just as it gets dark and then on through the night when you're asleep, just as it gets dark, you'll hear right now, almost anywhere in America, you're going to hear lots and lots of insects singing.
That's right. I think we have a cricket in our house last night because they were singing inside of our house. So that can happen too. Did anyone have any questions? You could raise your hand and then unmute and ask your question. Okay, I see someone. Is that John? You can go ahead and ask your question. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
You know that whiny but why they're whiny?
Yeah, you were saying that you thought the flashes on the last page kind of reminded him of lightning bugs.
Like lightning bugs?
Oh,
Yeah, like the light reflections on the picture on that very last
The
page.
white apple. The white folks talking to each other.
Yeah, that's what lightning bugs do.
So the lightning
And
bugs
do you
look like
see-
they were talking to each
And
other.
they're predators on board, flies, and spiders.
Yeah.
lightning bugs are wonderful. My wife and I go out. We still have a few. We had most of the lightning bugs we saw here in Indiana. We saw in June, and then not quite so many in July, and then just a few now. When we go out onto our screen porch, we have a porch on the back of our house with screens around it so we don't get eaten up by mosquitoes. And we like to go out and listen to the insects that I was talking about a moment ago, and also to watch the fireflies. I don't know whether the artist was trying to illustrate a firefly, but that would be great to have a firefly picture. I see another hand over here.
Yeah, Kala, you have your hand up. Can you unmute yourself?
It's Jojo.
Oh, hold on. I think Kala's going to ask a question, then we'll come right back to
Oh,
Jojo.
sorry, we can't see Kala.
That's okay. Go ahead, Kala. We're gonna
This isn't really a question. It's more of telling you something, but we found a creek that has lots of crayfishes in it.
Oh, really?
It's called
Did you see him?
Creek.
Yeah. Do you know the name of that creek?
Pokemon Creek.
Okay, okay. I think I've actually seen that creek. You know, you may know this, or your parents may know it if you don't. You live very close to where a very famous painter of birds lived for a while. His name was John James Audubon. And some of the earliest American birds that he saw were along that creek, Pokemon Creek. So that's a really famous place. Well, I'm glad you've seen crayfish there.
Great. Okay, now Jojo, do you want to ask your question?
When it was winter on the last page, do the fish still swim around in the cold water?
That's a really good question. The fish do stay in the stream during the winter because they don't really have any other place to go, but they don't die as long as there's some water that hasn't frozen solid. So they stay under the ice. If there's ice over the top of the river, they stay under the ice. And they're pretty still. They're not very active in the winter because they don't have lots of food to eat, and therefore they don't have lots of energy. But there are fish and crayfish living in the streams all through the winter, even when there's ice covering the streams.
That's a great question. Thanks, Jojo. Is there any more questions? I think I see another hand up. John, do you have a question?
What's your question?
And then fishermen catch the fish out of the water, and they fishermen uses a potato so they don't dry up.
Did you say what? Can the fishermen still fish if the water's really cold or frozen?
Yes, they can. But they tend to fish on frozen. They tend to fish on frozen lakes because lakes don't have moving water, flowing water, so they freeze earlier, and they have thicker ice so that it's actually safe to go out on the ice. And they cut a hole in the ice and drop their fishing lines down through the hole into the water. And especially in cold places, probably not where you live, further north, especially in cold, very cold places, there are fishermen and fisherwomen, fishers who will fish in the winter, but they tend to do it on lakes and ponds, not in creeks. But good question. Willow,
Okay.
did you have a question? Is there anything you're wondering about?
Any questions from
Maybe
you,
not.
Willow? It's okay if you don't. Okay, I see Kala has her hand up
fine.
again. Oh, Willow's showing us some, is that creek
Oh, that
glass?
is cool.
Yep, there's some creek glass.
Oh, the red one in particular. And there's a pretty blue one. And so they were pretty smoothed out from tumbling in the water, huh? And you found some too. Wow.
Yep.
That's a pretty flower.
Kala's got some too.
Yeah. Okay, Willow, I'm having trouble hearing you. I'm not sure you have a good connection. Kala, do you want to unmute? I see your hand up.
So, have you ever seen cranes at a lake before?
Cranes?
Yeah, cranes at a lake before. Because I've seen some flying around at Pokemon Creek. And that's also where
I didn't hear what it was. What have you seen flying around Pokemon Creek?
Cranes.
Did you?
Crane.
Oh, cranes. we do have cranes here in southern Indiana. I didn't see cranes when I was a boy in Ohio, but we have sandhill cranes, which are very common, but we also have whooping cranes, which are not common. They're very rare. We have those two kinds of cranes. I'm guessing what you would see where you live would be sandhill cranes. More glass,
A whole collection.
more creek.
This
Yeah, yeah.
thing is full of sea glass.
Sea glass? Oh, did you find that
I
at
found
the
it all at
the ocean
Pokemon.
shore?
Okay, thanks for sharing that, Kala. I think I saw JoJo had her hand up again too. You want to go ahead and share with us?
Yeah. So, the Native American Museum. This is from the Native Americans. It's an arrowhead.
Yes. Yes. And
Wow.
where did you find it? That is cool. And where did you find that, JoJo?
I found it at the Native American Museum. Gave it to me.
Mhm. Okay. And I like that it has little notches near the back, which is where they would use rawhide. It's kind of like string to tie it to the stick of the arrow. Yeah, that's a beauty.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's just like the ones that Scott found in the creek.
That's right.
Let's
That's right.
see. I see
Oh,
John
it's-
has his hand up again.
Can everybody see Willow's rabbits?
Willow's showing us on.
Oh.
Yeah. When we go
I didn't hear you, John. If you had a question, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
get the water high. When the water's high, when the water's high, some people go to our pond and try to fish in some way, catching crayfish at the dam, at the pond.
Yeah, we have a pond near us that we like to go and walk to, and we can see a lot of animals similar to what's in the book, and a lot of people go that pond
Yeah.
to fish too.
Yeah, sometimes the days when we've been walking up to the pond and when the playground near the pond is closed, but we saw a white-tailed deer ball one.
Oh, yeah, we saw some deer by our pond.
Great, just like in the book.
You have a pond, you will have animals come visit if you have water that way. You're
Yeah,
lucky.
wonderful.
There's a enclosure for monarch. I see
Yeah,
a
it looks like
chrysalis in
Kala's
there.
showing us the butterfly net.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kala, have any of your chrysalises hatched out as butterflies? I think she's muted, but
Mhm.
she's
Well, we have had some monarch chrysalises in the past that have hatched, and we've also had black swallowtails.
Oh, black swallowtail. That's a beautiful butterfly. Yes. Yes.
Great, great. Thank you for sharing. Okay, I think, have we gotten to everybody's questions? We've had a lot of really nice discussion. This is great. I see a chat says from Daryl says, thank you so much. We're signing off now. That's fine. We're gonna wrap up. I think, was there a couple more slides you wanted me to show?
Yeah, let's look at a couple more slides and I'll just say a word about them. And
Okay,
then,
just for a couple minutes, and then we'll wrap
Yep.
up. Here we go. There's, looks like some creeks.
Yeah, so those are the kinds of creeks that I knew as a boy in Ohio. So those are the kinds of creeks I had in mind when I was writing the story, Crawdad Creek. The little girl, this is just a photograph I found. I don't know who the little girl is, but you can see it's a very shallow creek. It just comes up over her ankles. And those were the kinds of creeks that I would play in when I was a boy. But they had lots of rocks in them, like the one on the left-hand side. So that's one thing I wanted to show you, and then we can go to the next 2 slides.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a map of the United States, and what it shows, all these colorful patches, are watersheds. They're big watersheds, lots of small streams, and then bigger rivers, and then bigger rivers, all flow together, and eventually all that water ends up in the ocean, one way or another, either in the north or down in the Gulf of Mexico. And you see that it's sort of purple violet color that has Ohio written on it. That Ohio is not the state it's talking about, it's the Ohio River.
Yeah, and John, can you go call Daddy? Tell him I need him to come up here.
I think we need you on mute.
Yeah, our screen is completely dark. I can't see anything to try and mute it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I think you're on mute now. Okay.
And you all live in a watershed, a really big watershed that's pink. It says mid-Atlantic. The Atlantic Ocean is what it's referring to, right?
Yep.
And
you can see our state.
The water, when it rains at your house or your apartment, when it rains, the water that falls on the streets and falls in the yards and falls in the parks ends up going in to the bigger rivers and washes out and flows out into the ocean down where that arrow is. So a watershed is, the Darby Creek has a small watershed and it flows into the Delaware River. The Delaware River has a much bigger watershed because there are other creeks and streams that flow into the Delaware River. So it's, if we thought about our whole country, the United States, in terms of watersheds, we wouldn't have all these colors like this, but this would be a much more realistic way of thinking about America. And one more slide, one last slide. Now
Wow,
this is
really interesting.
This is a picture. This shows the major, only the major rivers in America, the lower 48 states of America. And they use all the different colors. So the very big part at the middle of the country, it's pale purple, violet colored. The biggest single shape that you see. Those all flow into the Mississippi River. That's the largest watershed in the United States. And eventually all of that water flows into the Gulf of Mexico down in Louisiana. And again, your watershed is the green one up in the upper right-hand corner.
Yep, this is just so beautiful and just a completely different way to look at our country without the state lines, you know, and it just shows to me, what it shows is how everything is so connected, you know, and we don't see it when we're just walking along a creek, but when you zoom out and see this really big picture, you can see how all the water is really connected and flows, you know, it all flows downstream to somewhere else. So the things we do at in our creek is going to flow somewhere else and affect water where someone else is living.
That's right. So everything that people do on the land and release onto the land ends up in a stream somewhere. It ends up in a river and ends up in the ocean. So that's why it's so important for us to be careful about what we allow to get into our streams. We don't want to put poisons in there. We don't want to put debris, junk in there. We want to keep our streams clean. Again, not just because we need clean streams and clean water, but because all animals on Earth need clean water. Well, I've enjoyed sharing a book with you and talking with you. And I hope that you all get a chance to get out into the world. Again, if you're little, you ought to have a grown-up with you, especially if you're going to be anywhere near water. But I bet there's a grown-up who cares enough about you. First of all, they signed you up for this little visit today. You have a grown-up or many grown-ups who care enough about you to want to take you out into the living world, where you will find beauty and excitement and discoveries everywhere.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. I loved having you and having you share the book. It's just beautiful, and I hope it inspires everyone to just go out exploring.
Make your discoveries. So take
Okay.
care. I'm going to take off now.
Thank you.
And,
Okay. Bye, everyone. Enjoy your afternoon.
Bye.